Standing in the back pew of St. Mary's Cathedral in suburban Cleveland, I watched my grandfather's funeral unfold like a stranger peering through someone else's window. At 32 years old, I had perfected the art of invisibility, even at family gatherings. My siblings Sarah and David sat in the front row, with our parents receiving hushed condolences and gentle touches on their shoulders. Meanwhile, I remained alone, clutching the program with trembling fingers, wondering why grief felt so complicated when you were never really part of the family being mourned. Then an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached me during the service, her whisper cutting through my isolation like a blade through silence. She pressed yellowed newspaper clippings into my palm and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my existence. Those newspaper clippings contained more than just faded headlines about a missing child case from 30 years ago. Tucked between the articles, I found what appeared to be my real birth certificate alongside DNA evidence that made my hands shake uncontrollably. The name read, Michael James Sullivan, born in Columbus General Hospital on March 15, 1992. Not Matthew Hoffman, the identity I had carried through 3 decades of servitude and emotional neglect. Growing up in the Hoffman household meant understanding your place from the moment you could walk. While Sarah enjoyed ballet lessons every Tuesday and Thursday, I scrubbed baseboards with an old toothbrush, making sure no speck of dust remained to trigger another lecture about gratitude. David received a brand new bicycle for his 8th birthday, complete with streamers and a bell that announced his joy to the entire neighborhood. That same year, I spent my birthday cleaning out the garage, organizing tools I was forbidden to touch except for maintenance purposes. The basement became my sanctuary and my prison. Richard and Linda Hoffman converted the space into what they generously called my bedroom, though the concrete walls remained unpainted and the single window was too small to provide adequate natural light. A twin mattress on a metal frame, a plastic dresser from a discount store, and a lamp with a flickering bulb comprised my entire universe. Every morning at 5:30, I climbed the creaky wooden stairs to begin my daily routine of cooking breakfast, packing lunches, and ensuring the house sparkled before anyone else awakened. School proved equally isolating. While Sarah and David attended Westmore Academy, a prestigious private institution with manicured lawns and state-of-the-art facilities, I walked 12 blocks to Cleveland Public School, number 47. My uniform consisted of secondhand khakis with patches on the knees and polo shirts that had seen better days, purchased from thrift stores when my growth spurts demanded new clothing. The other students never invited me to birthday parties or sleepovers, perhaps sensing something different about a boy who always smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and carried lunch in a paper bag while they enjoyed carefully prepared meals from insulated containers. Christmas mornings highlighted the family hierarchy with painful clarity. Sarah and David would discover bicycles, gaming systems, designer clothing, and electronics wrapped in expensive paper beneath the tree. My contributions to their joy came through hours of preparation, setting up the new computer, assembling furniture, organizing gift wrap, and ribbons for disposal. By the time the family gathered for gift exchange, I had already retreated to the kitchen to prepare the holiday feast, listening to squeals of delight from the next room while peeling potatoes and basting the turkey. The emotional manipulation ran deeper than mere chores and isolation. Linda Hoffman possessed a talent for psychological warfare disguised as maternal concern. She would remind me daily that foster care represented my only alternative, describing horrific stories of abuse and neglect that awaited ungrateful children who forgot their place. Richard reinforced these messages through cold indifference, punctuated by occasional explosions of anger when my performance failed to meet impossible standards. A water spot on a glass, a wrinkle in a freshly laundered shirt, or a millisecond delay in responding to commands could trigger hours of verbal assault about my inadequacies and their generous decision to provide me with shelter. Academic achievement became my desperate attempt to earn approval, that never materialized. Maintaining straight A grades while managing household responsibilities required sacrificing sleep and social development, but I convinced myself that educational excellence might finally prove my worth. When report cards arrived, Sarah and David received praise monetary rewards and special dinner celebrations for their B-plus averages at their elite academy. My perfect grades earned a brief nod and reminder that smart children should be grateful for opportunities to demonstrate their value through service. High school graduation approached, with no discussion of college plans, career aspirations, or future possibilities. While guidance counselors helped other students complete applications and pursue scholarships, I focused on perfecting pot roast recipes and learning advanced laundry techniques. The day I turned 18, Richard laughed at my tentative inquiry about higher education, explaining that maids rarely required degrees and suggesting I focus on developing practical skills that would serve the family for years to come. Standing in that church pew, reading about Michael James Sullivan's disappearance from a grocery store parking lot in Columbus, I realized the devastating truth. The DNA evidence Agnes provided matched samples from a missing child case that had generated national attention. The kidnapping occurred when I was only 2 years old, snatched from a shopping cart while my real mother loaded groceries into her car. The reward money had grown from $50,000 to $12 million over 3 decades, reflecting my biological parents' unwavering determination to bring their son home. Leaving the funeral service without explanation felt like the first autonomous decision I had made in 32 years. My hands shook as I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic to the Cleveland Public Library, one of the few places where I could access internet resources without surveillance from the Hoffman household. The computer screen flickered to life as I typed the names from those precious newspaper clippings, Dr. James Sullivan and Professor Maria Sullivan of Columbus, Ohio. The search results painted a picture of devastation and determination that left me breathless. Dr. James Sullivan served as head of pediatric surgery at Columbus Children's Hospital, dedicating his professional life to healing young patients while never abandoning hope that his own child might return. Professor Maria Sullivan taught comparative literature at Ohio State University, channeling her grief into scholarship focused on narratives of loss and recovery. Their joint interview from just 6 months earlier showed 2 people aged beyond their 55 years, their faces etched with the particular sorrow that belongs to parents whose children vanish without explanation. The Sullivan Foundation for Missing Children had helped locate over 300 kidnapped kids during its 29-year existence. Their website contained heartbreaking testimonials from families reunited through their advocacy, alongside photos of children who remained missing. The foundation's annual budget exceeded $2 million, funded entirely through Dr. and Professor Sullivan's combined incomes, speaking fees and donations from grateful families. They had mortgaged their house 4 times to finance private investigations, hired retired FBI agents as consultants, and maintained a 24-hour hotline staffed by volunteers trained in crisis intervention. Agnes's evidence folder contained more than just newspaper articles. Bank records showed suspicious transactions from Richard Hoffman's accounts to something called Midwest Family Services, a company that supposedly facilitated adoptions, but had no legitimate business address. Phone records revealed dozens of calls between the Hoffman house and numbers traced to similar questionable organizations across Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. The pattern suggested a coordinated network, rather than an isolated incident implying that my case represented just one transaction in a larger criminal enterprise. Research into Midwest Family Services unveiled a disturbing history of complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau investigations by state social service agencies and connections to at least 7 other families who had acquired children through unconventional means. The company's founder, a man named Vincent Torres, had served 2 prison terms for fraud before establishing his adoption business. His associates included former social workers who had lost their licenses, disbarred attorneys, and convicted felons with histories of child endangerment. The most chilling discovery came through archived local newspaper databases. 3 other children had lived with the Hoffman family over the past 20 years, each staying approximately 2 to 3 years before being transferred to relatives who lived out of state. The pattern suggested that Richard and Linda operated a way station in the trafficking network housing children until permanent placements could be arranged or ransom demands fulfilled. Photos from school yearbooks showed a girl named Emma who lived with them when I was 12, a boy called Joshua who arrived when I turned 15, and twins named Ashley and Andrew who disappeared just before I graduated high school. Local law enforcement records contained missing person reports for all 4 children filed by families from different states who had lost track of their kids under suspicious circumstances. Emma Rodriguez had been reported missing from a park in Detroit 6 months before appearing in Cleveland. Joshua Kim vanished from a bus stop in Indianapolis and surfaced at Jefferson Elementary School the following semester. The twins disappeared from a shopping mall in Cincinnati and enrolled at Westmore Academy under the names Ashley and Andrew Hoffman, supposedly adopted cousins visiting for an extended period. My real parents had never stopped believing in my eventual return. Annual newspaper interviews chronicled their unwavering faith, their refusal to hold memorial services, and their continued celebration of my birthday, with cake and presents stored in a bedroom that remained exactly as they had left it 30 years earlier. Professor Sullivan had written scholarly articles about the literature of hope, examining how families process ambiguous loss when children disappear without confirmation of death. Dr. Sullivan had testified before Congress about the need for improved systems to track missing children and had consulted on dozens of similar cases pro bono. The reward money had grown through compound interest donations from supporters and matching funds from corporations that supported their foundation. $12 million represented more than just financial compensation. It symbolized the value they placed on recovering their stolen child and the resources they were willing to sacrifice for closure. The reward poster displayed updated age progression photos, showing what I might look like as an adult, created by forensic artists using advanced computer modeling techniques. As I prepared to make the phone call that would change everything, my cell phone buzzed with a text message from Linda Hoffman demanding my immediate return home to prepare dinner for unexpected guests. The familiar pattern of control attempted to reassert itself even in this moment of potential liberation. Instead of responding with my usual compliance, I turned off the phone, walked to the library's information desk, and asked to use their landline for an important long-distance call. The number from the reward poster connected me to a voicemail system, but within seconds, a woman answered with desperate urgency. Her first words, spoken in a voice trembling with 3 decades of accumulated hope, would forever mark the moment when Michael James Sullivan began to reclaim his stolen identity from the ashes of Matthew Hoffman's constructed existence. Professor Maria Sullivan answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the weight of countless false hopes and shattered dreams. When I struggled to form words that could adequately explain my situation, she listened with the patience of someone who had imagined this conversation thousands of times. Her immediate recognition of something familiar in my vocal patterns sent chills through my entire body, confirming what the DNA evidence had already revealed. The conversation became a torrent of 30 years' worth of compressed emotion. She described my favorite stuffed animal, a blue elephant named Peanuts, that I had clutched during our final shopping trip together. She recalled my habit of humming while coloring my preference for grape juice over apple, and my fear of loud noises that had developed after a 4th of July fireworks display. These intimate details, stored carefully in her memory for 3 decades, matched fragments of my earliest recollections that I had always dismissed as imagination, rather than genuine memories. Dr. Sullivan joined the conversation from his office at Columbus Children's Hospital, where he was completing rounds between surgeries. His voice broke when he heard me speak, and he immediately began making arrangements to meet at the Columbus Police Department's Victim Services building. They had established protocols for this moment years earlier, working with law enforcement to ensure that any potential reunion would be handled with appropriate security and legal documentation. The drive from Cleveland to Columbus should have taken approximately 2 hours, but my journey became complicated when I noticed the black Chevrolet Suburban that had been following me since I left the library. Richard Hoffman's voice on my cell phone carried a tone I had never heard before, cold, calculated, and filled with barely controlled rage. He informed me that tracking software had been monitoring my location and online activities for months, part of their comprehensive security system designed to protect family assets from external threats. His words revealed the true nature of my captivity with terrifying clarity. The legal adoption papers he mentioned were sophisticated forgeries created by their network of corrupt officials designed to withstand casual scrutiny while providing legal cover for their operations. He described in detail how the trafficking ring had eliminated previous problems through methods that left no traceable evidence, suggesting that my real parents' lives now hung in the balance based on my next decisions. The chase through rural Ohio highways became a deadly game of cat and mouse, as I attempted to reach the police station while avoiding the Suburban that seemed determined to force me off the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white while my heart hammered against my chest with each aggressive maneuver from my pursuers. The irony of being chased by people I had considered family just hours earlier created a surreal nightmare that challenged my ability to process reality. Professor Sullivan remained on the phone throughout the chase, her voice providing an anchor of stability in the chaos swirling around me. She guided me through alternate routes to the police station while simultaneously coordinating with dispatch to send patrol cars to intercept the Suburban. Her calm professionalism, honed through years of crisis management in her missing children's advocacy work, contrasted sharply with my panic and confusion. Dr. Sullivan had already contacted their attorney, who was en route to the police station with documentation gathered over 30 years of investigation. The legal team had prepared for this moment by assembling evidence packets that could be quickly presented to law enforcement, including DNA samples, medical records from my birth, and witness statements from the grocery store employees who had been present during the kidnapping. The police station parking lot provided the first sense of safety I had experienced since discovering the truth about my identity. 3 patrol cars formed a protective barrier around my vehicle, while officers approached the Suburban with weapons drawn. Richard Hoffman's arrogant demeanor persisted, even as handcuffs were applied. His final shouted threats promising that this confrontation represented only the beginning of a much larger battle. Running across that parking lot toward 2 people I had never met, but somehow recognized in the deepest part of my soul, felt like awakening from a 3-decade nightmare. Professor Sullivan's embrace carried the desperate intensity of a mother reclaiming her lost child, while Dr. Sullivan's gentle hands examined my face, as if confirming that his son had indeed returned. Their tears mixed with mine as we clung together, 3 strangers bound by blood and trauma finally reunited, despite impossible odds. The initial euphoria of reunion quickly gave way to harsh reality when Richard Hoffman's attorney arrived with documents that complicated everything. The legal adoption papers appeared authentic enough to raise questions about my status, while counter-accusations suggested that the Sullivans were attempting to kidnap a legally adopted adult. The complexity of the case meant that immediate resolution was impossible, requiring extensive investigation and potentially lengthy court proceedings. Richard's final threat screamed from the back of the police car, promised that evidence existed which could destroy the Sullivan family's reputation and livelihood. His words carried the weight of someone who understood exactly which pressure points would cause maximum damage, suggesting that the trafficking network possessed information or resources capable of inflicting serious harm on my real parents. As we sat in the police station conference room surrounded by evidence boxes and legal documents, I realized that discovering my true identity represented only the first step in a much more dangerous journey. The reunion I had dreamed about had finally occurred, but the price of freedom from 30 years of captivity might cost my real parents everything they had built while searching for their missing son. The legal proceedings unfolded with surprising complexity as Richard and Linda Hoffman's attorney presented adoption documentation that appeared professionally crafted and officially notarized. Their claim that I had been legally adopted through proper channels gained temporary credibility when corrupt officials from the Ohio Department of Social Services testified on their behalf. The trafficking network had infiltrated multiple government agencies over decades, creating a web of complicit bureaucrats who validated fraudulent paperwork in exchange for substantial financial compensation. Detective Rodriguez from the Columbus Police Department's Specialized Crimes Unit explained how these networks operated with sophisticated planning and extensive corruption. The Hoffmans weren't merely opportunistic kidnappers, but essential components of a multi-state operation that generated millions of dollars annually through child trafficking, forced labor, and extortion schemes. Their house had served as a distribution center where kidnapped children were processed, documented with false identities, and transferred to families seeking untraceable domestic workers or adoptable children. Within hours of their arrest, both Richard and Linda Hoffman posted bail through funds provided by their network associates, demonstrating the financial resources and legal connections that had protected their operations for decades. Their immediate release, despite serious charges, revealed the depth of corruption within the judicial system as sympathetic judges and compromised prosecutors worked to minimize their exposure while the investigation continued. The shocking revelation came when Sarah and David Hoffman contacted me through victim services, requesting a private meeting despite their parents' explicit instructions to maintain distance. Detective Rodriguez arranged a secure location where the three of us could speak without surveillance from the trafficking network's associates. Their appearance at the meeting surprised me. Both looked exhausted, frightened, and significantly older than their actual ages of 28 and 26. Sarah carried 3 cardboard boxes filled with evidence she had been secretly collecting since high school when she first began to suspect that their family's activities involved criminal behavior. Her training as a social worker had provided insight into trafficking patterns, allowing her to recognize the signs that other children who lived with them had been victims rather than legitimate adoptees. She had documented everything, recorded conversations using her cell phone, photographed financial documents left carelessly on Richard's desk, and maintained detailed journals describing the treatment of children who passed through their household. David's contribution to the evidence collection was equally impressive but more technologically sophisticated. His computer programming skills had enabled him to hack into Richard's email accounts, access hidden financial records stored on encrypted drives, and trace digital communications between trafficking network members across multiple states. His documentation revealed the full scope of their parents' criminal enterprise, including detailed records of at least 12 other kidnapped children who had been processed through the Hoffman house over 20 years. The emotional complexity of our conversation challenged every assumption I had made about my siblings' complicity in my abuse. Sarah broke down while describing how she had tried to protect me during our childhood, secretly leaving extra food in my room, attempting to include me in family activities, and providing emotional support when our parents' cruelty became overwhelming. Her failures to intervene more directly stemmed from genuine terror that Richard would sell her to another trafficking family if she caused too much trouble. David revealed that he had purposely failed his college entrance exams to avoid leaving home, fearing that my situation would deteriorate further without any witnesses present. He had endured years of psychological abuse from Richard, who threatened to eliminate the entire family if anyone betrayed the network's operations. Their decision to finally come forward resulted from mounting evidence that Richard planned to kill me rather than risk exposure through my reunion with my biological parents. The evidence they provided transformed the investigation from a single kidnapping case into a federal trafficking probe involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. Bank records showed payments totaling over $3 million from families across 7 states who had purchased children through the network. Phone records revealed communications with similar operations in Texas, Florida, and California, suggesting a national scope that dwarfed local law enforcement capabilities. Sarah's recordings captured Richard and Linda discussing the disposal of children who had become liabilities using euphemisms that barely disguised their willingness to commit murder when necessary. David's computer files contained correspondence with a crematorium owner who charged premium rates for services that required no death certificates or official documentation. The systematic nature of their operations indicated that numerous children had disappeared permanently when trafficking arrangements failed or victims threatened to expose the network. The most disturbing revelation concerned the fate of Emma Joshua and the twins who had lived with us during my adolescence. Financial records showed payments for their transfer to families who specialized in forced labor, sexual exploitation, and organ trafficking. None of the children had been reunited with their biological families. Instead, they had been sold to increasingly dangerous situations until their value was completely exhausted. David's evidence suggested that at least 4 children had been killed when they aged out of usefulness or posed security risks. Detective Rodriguez explained that Sarah and David's cooperation would be essential for prosecuting the entire network, but their testimony would place them in extreme danger from associates who remained at large. Federal marshals arranged protective custody, while the investigation expanded to include raids on affiliated operations in multiple states. Their decision to come forward represented an extraordinary act of courage that would likely result in lifetime separation from any semblance of normal existence. As we prepared to leave the secure location, David handed me a flash drive containing additional evidence he had discovered just before their parents' arrest. The files revealed Richard's final contingency plan, a contract with assassins who specialized in eliminating entire families when trafficking networks faced exposure. The hit had been scheduled for that evening, targeting both my biological parents and me to prevent our testimony from destroying decades of criminal operations. The federal raids launched simultaneously across 7 states at dawn, coordinated by a task force that had been investigating child trafficking networks for over 2 years. Agent Martinez from the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit explained that my case had provided the breakthrough they needed to connect disparate investigations into a comprehensive operation targeting the entire organization. Search warrants executed in Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia uncovered evidence of systematic kidnapping, child slavery, and murders spanning 3 decades. The Hoffman House basement revealed a sophisticated prison designed for holding multiple children during processing periods. Hidden cameras throughout the property had recorded thousands of hours of child abuse, creating blackmail material used to silence victims and control participating families. A secret room behind the furnace contained restraints, medical equipment for basic health care, and filing cabinets filled with false identification documents for dozens of children who had passed through their facility over 20 years. Computer analysis of Richard's files exposed the network's business model with chilling precision. Children were categorized by age, appearance, and perceived intelligence, then marketed to specific customer bases seeking different types of exploitation. Families wanting household slaves paid between $50,000 and $100,000 for children under 12, who could be easily controlled and trained. Agricultural operations purchased older children for farm labor at reduced prices, while the most attractive children commanded premium rates from buyers involved in sexual exploitation or international trafficking. My case represented an anomaly in their typical operations that had ultimately compromised their security. The original plan involved collecting ransom money from Dr. and Professor Sullivan, then eliminating me to prevent identification of the network. When the initial ransom exchange failed due to police surveillance, Richard decided to keep me as free domestic labor rather than risk exposure through additional kidnapping attempts. This deviation from standard protocol created a loose end that eventually unraveled their entire organization. The investigation revealed that I had a twin brother named Marcus, who had been kidnapped during the same grocery store incident but sold immediately to a different family in Kentucky. The separation of twins reduced the likelihood that either child would be recognized or that we would remember enough details to expose the kidnapping. Marcus had endured 30 years of forced labor on a tobacco farm, believing that his biological parents had abandoned him due to behavioral problems that made him unfit for civilized society. Agent Martinez showed me photographs of Marcus taken during his rescue from the Kentucky farm, where he had spent his entire life working without compensation. The resemblance between us was undeniable, despite the obvious effects of outdoor labor, malnutrition, and physical abuse that had marked his development differently than mine. His captors, the Patterson family, had convinced him that his real parents were dead and that only their charitable intervention had saved him from foster care or institutional placement. The Patterson farm served as another processing facility within the trafficking network, specializing in children destined for agricultural labor throughout the southeastern United States. Marcus's DNA confirmed his identity as my twin brother, and his testimony provided crucial evidence about the network's operations in Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina. His account of the Patterson family's treatment revealed systematic abuse designed to break children's spirits and eliminate any hope of escape or rescue. Federal protection became necessary when the investigation uncovered assassination contracts targeting key witnesses, including my biological parents, Sarah, David Marcus, and me. The network's leadership had ordered the elimination of anyone capable of providing testimony that could result in life sentences for the organization's founders. Professional hitmen with military backgrounds had been contracted to make the killings appear accidental or like random violent crimes, thereby protecting the network from further exposure. Dr. and Professor Sullivan were moved to a secure location, while federal agents analyzed threats against their lives and professional reputations. The network possessed compromising information about Dr. Sullivan's medical practice, including fabricated evidence of malpractice and professional misconduct that could destroy his career. Similar blackmail material targeted Professor Sullivan's academic position with forged documents, suggesting plagiarism and inappropriate relationships with students. The scope of corruption extended into law enforcement agencies, judicial systems, and social services departments that had facilitated the network's operations for decades. Dozens of officials faced federal charges for accepting bribes, falsifying documents, and obstructing investigations into missing children cases. The systematic nature of the corruption explained how the network had operated with impunity while destroying hundreds of families through kidnapping and trafficking. Marcus arrived in Columbus under federal protection, accompanied by agents who had rescued him from the Patterson farm during coordinated raids. Our reunion represented the first time in 30 years that we had been in the same room, creating an emotional intensity that overwhelmed both of us. Despite our different experiences, we shared identical mannerisms, speech patterns, and physical characteristics that confirmed our biological relationship beyond any doubt. The final threat came when Richard Hoffman posted bail again through funds provided by network associates who remained at large. His release triggered immediate security concerns as federal agents intercepted communications indicating that he planned to eliminate all witnesses rather than face life imprisonment. Electronic monitoring and federal surveillance provided limited protection against someone with access to professional assassins and unlimited financial resources from trafficking operations. Richard's escape from federal custody during a medical transport created a manhunt involving multiple agencies as he disappeared into a network of safe houses and sympathetic contacts throughout the Midwest. His final communication, intercepted through electronic surveillance, promised that he would personally kill everyone responsible for exposing the trafficking network before allowing himself to be captured alive. The threat gained credibility when associates confirmed that Richard possessed military training, access to weapons, and detailed knowledge of our locations despite federal protection efforts. Marcus arrived at the secure federal facility carrying a duffel bag filled with evidence that would prove even more damaging to the trafficking network than anything we had discovered previously. His 30 years of captivity on the Patterson farm had provided him with unique access to communications between network cells, financial records from agricultural trafficking operations, and detailed knowledge of their distribution systems throughout the southeastern United States. His photographic memory, developed through years of intense focus required for survival, had allowed him to memorize license plate numbers, addresses, and names that connected dozens of trafficking operations across multiple states. Our first conversation lasted 14 hours as we compared experiences and discovered the parallel nature of our abuse, despite being separated by hundreds of miles. Marcus described waking before dawn to tend livestock, working tobacco fields, under brutal summer heat, and sleeping in a converted barn stall that barely provided protection from winter weather. The Patterson family had convinced him that outdoor labor built character, and that his biological parents had specifically requested his placement with agriculturally oriented adoptive families who could teach proper work ethics. The evidence Marcus brought included audio recordings captured using a device hidden in his work clothing, documenting conversations between Roger Patterson and network coordinators about buying and selling children for various purposes. Financial records showed payments from tobacco companies who knowingly purchased crops harvested using child labor, creating corporate liability that extended the criminal conspiracy into major agricultural businesses. Marcus had also photographed secret graves on the Patterson property where children who died from overwork or abuse had been buried without official death certificates or notifications to authorities. Federal agents confirmed that the recordings Marcus provided contained admissions of murder conspiracy and ongoing criminal operations that would result in life sentences for everyone involved. Roger Patterson had personally killed 3 children over 20 years when their physical disabilities prevented them from maintaining productivity standards expected from trafficking victims. His wife Barbara had assisted with disposal of bodies and falsification of records that explained their disappearances as voluntary departures or transfers to other facilities. The strategic planning session at the federal facility brought together evidence from all aspects of the investigation to prepare for coordinated prosecutions that would eliminate the entire trafficking network simultaneously. Marcus and I worked with agents to create detailed maps showing connections between facilities, identify key players who remained at large, and prioritize targets for arrest warrants that would prevent the network from reorganizing after initial raids. Our collaboration revealed complementary skill sets that had developed during our separate captivities. My experience managing household operations had taught me organizational abilities and attention to detail that proved valuable for analyzing complex financial documents. Marcus's agricultural background provided insights into labor trafficking patterns and seasonal migration routes used to transport children between facilities. Together, we could interpret evidence that individual agents might miss due to their lack of direct experience with trafficking operations. The escape alert came at 3 a.m. when electronic monitoring detected that Richard Hoffman had neutralized his tracking device and disappeared from the supposed secure location where federal marshals believed they were maintaining surveillance. Security cameras showed him leaving through a basement exit that had been overlooked during the initial security assessment, suggesting that he possessed detailed knowledge of the facility's layout and vulnerabilities. Richard's phone calls to the Patterson farm, intercepted by federal surveillance, revealed his intention to eliminate all witnesses before escaping to international destinations where extradition would be impossible. His military background included special operations training that made him extremely dangerous when cornered, while his network connections provided access to weapons vehicles and safe houses throughout the region. Federal agents estimated that he could reach our location within 6 hours if he traveled directly without attempting to evade pursuit. The decision to transfer us to my biological parents' house reflected federal agents' assessment that Richard would likely target that location regardless of our presence there, making it easier to defend a single position rather than multiple scattered sites. Dr. and Professor Sullivan's home had been converted into a fortress with electronic security systems, armed federal agents, and communication equipment that would allow immediate response to any threats against our safety. Marcus and I spent our final hours before Richard's expected arrival, sharing childhood memories that had somehow survived 30 years of separation and trauma. We discovered that we had maintained identical habits and preferences despite growing up in completely different environments, suggesting that genetics played a larger role in personality development than either of us had previously understood. Our conversation helped us prepare emotionally for a confrontation that would determine whether we finally achieved freedom or became additional victims of the trafficking network's desperate attempt to avoid justice. The attack began just after sunset when Richard Hoffman crashed a stolen pickup truck through the front gate and approached the house armed with military-grade weapons intended to kill everyone inside. Federal agents engaged him immediately, but his tactical training and familiarity with combat situations made him a formidable opponent who advanced steadily toward his targets despite facing overwhelming opposition. Marcus and I refused to remain passive victims, waiting for others to determine our fate. When Richard breached the house's perimeter defenses and entered through the kitchen door, we confronted him together with 30 years of accumulated rage, fueling our determination to end his threats permanently. The physical confrontation became intensely personal as we fought not just for our lives, but for the right to exist without fear of the man who had stolen our childhood and destroyed countless other families through his criminal enterprise. Richard's death came not through gunfire or federal intervention, but through a massive heart attack triggered by the stress of combat and his realization that the empire he had built was collapsing around him. His final words provided GPS coordinates for burial sites in 3 states where additional trafficking victims could be recovered, offering closure for families who had never learned the fate of their missing children. The medical examiner later determined that years of drug abuse and the stress of maintaining criminal operations had weakened his cardiovascular system to the point where physical exertion became fatal. The trials that followed over the next 18 months resulted in convictions for 97 individuals involved in the trafficking network, with sentences ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment without parole. Federal prosecutors successfully dismantled operations in 12 states, recovering 43 kidnapped children, who were reunited with their biological families through DNA testing and careful investigation. The complexity of the cases required cooperation between multiple federal agencies, international law enforcement, and specialized units trained in human trafficking prosecution. Marcus and I testified in 17 different trials, providing first-hand accounts of our experiences that helped convict everyone from low-level kidnappers to high-ranking network coordinators. Our testimony proved especially valuable because we could describe the trafficking operations from the perspective of long-term captives who had witnessed decades of criminal activity. Federal prosecutors used our accounts to demonstrate the systematic nature of the abuse and the psychological methods employed to control victims over extended periods. The civil litigation against corporations that had benefited from child labor resulted in settlements totaling over $200 million funds that were directed toward establishing comprehensive support services for trafficking survivors and their families. Agricultural companies that had purchased tobacco cotton and produced harvested using child labor faced bankruptcy proceedings, while government agencies that had facilitated the trafficking through corruption lost federal funding and faced complete reorganization. under federal oversight. Sarah and David Hoffman entered witness protection programs that provided them with new identities and relocation services, recognizing their essential cooperation in exposing the trafficking network, despite the personal danger they faced from remaining criminal associates. Their decision to testify against their parents required extraordinary courage, as they sacrificed any possibility of maintaining relationships with extended family members or returning to their previous lives in Cleveland. Dr. and Professor Sullivan struggled with overwhelming guilt about their inability to protect Marcus and me during our childhoods, requiring extensive therapy to process their grief about 30 years of lost relationships. Their foundation for missing children expanded rapidly using settlement money and donations from supporters who had followed our story through media coverage. The foundation's services now included residential treatment facilities for trafficking survivors, legal advocacy for families navigating reunification, and educational programs designed to prevent future kidnapping incidents. My adjustment to normal family relationships proved more difficult than I had anticipated, requiring specialized counseling to address complex trauma and attachment disorders developed during 30 years of systematic abuse. Learning to accept unconditional love from parents who expected nothing in return challenged psychological defense mechanisms that had been essential for survival in the Hoffman household. Simple activities like family dinners, birthday celebrations, and casual conversations required conscious effort to overcome ingrained patterns of hypervigilance and emotional withdrawal. Marcus faced similar challenges adapting to life outside agricultural labor, struggling with anxiety attacks triggered by indoor environments, and difficulty trusting authority figures who claimed to have his best interests at heart. His educational development had been severely limited by forced labor that prevented school attendance, requiring intensive tutoring to develop basic academic skills needed for adult independence. Physical therapy addressed chronic injuries sustained through decades of heavy manual labor without adequate medical care or recovery time. The therapeutic process revealed that Marcus and I had developed complementary survival strategies during our separate captivities that actually strengthened our relationship when we finally reunited. My experience managing household operations had taught me organizational skills and emotional regulation that helped Marcus navigate complex social situations. His agricultural background had developed physical strength and practical problem-solving abilities that provided security when I felt overwhelmed by unexpected changes or challenging circumstances. Our decision to pursue higher education together reflected our commitment to transforming our traumatic experiences into tools for helping other trafficking survivors achieve successful recovery. I enrolled in criminal justice studies at Ohio State University, where Professor Sullivan's academic connections provided additional support and mentoring opportunities. Marcus chose agricultural science programs that would allow him to develop ethical farming operations as an alternative to the exploitative labor practices he had experienced throughout his childhood. The romantic relationships that developed during our recovery process required careful navigation of trust issues and communication patterns that had been shaped by decades of manipulation and abuse. My relationship with Jessica, a fellow trafficking survivor I met through foundation support groups, progressed slowly as we both learned to distinguish healthy interdependence from the codependent relationships that had characterized our previous experiences with authority figures. Marcus found companionship with Amanda, a social worker, specializing in agricultural trafficking, who had assisted with his rescue from the Patterson farm. Their professional relationship evolved into personal friendship and eventually romantic partnership as they worked together on cases involving children rescued from similar situations throughout the southeastern United States. Their shared commitment to preventing future trafficking provided a foundation for building trust and emotional intimacy despite their different backgrounds. Our wedding ceremonies took place at St. Mary's Cathedral, the same location where my grandfather's funeral had triggered the discovery of our true identities 3 years earlier. The symbolic significance of celebrating new beginnings in the place where our liberation had begun provided emotional closure for the traumatic journey that had brought us to this point. Agnes, the elderly woman who had provided the initial evidence about our kidnapping, served as honorary grandmother for both ceremonies, representing the courage of ordinary people who choose to intervene when they witness injustice. The Sullivan Foundation's expansion into international trafficking prevention reflected our family's commitment to addressing the global scope of child exploitation that extends far beyond American borders. Marcus and I traveled to conferences in 12 countries, sharing our experiences with law enforcement agencies, social service providers, and government officials working to combat trafficking operations in their jurisdictions. Our first-person accounts of long-term captivity provided insights that academic research could not capture, helping professionals understand the psychological impact of trafficking on survivors and their families. The Foundation's residential treatment center in Columbus became a model for trauma-informed care that addressed the complex needs of trafficking survivors without replicating the institutional environments that many had experienced during their captivity. Our involvement in program design ensured that services reflected the perspectives of survivors rather than just the clinical assumptions of treatment providers who lacked direct experience with trafficking situations. Marcus's agricultural consulting business developed ethical farming practices that provided employment opportunities for trafficking survivors, while demonstrating that profitable agricultural operations could exist without exploiting child labor. His farms throughout Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee employed over 200 former trafficking victims, providing housing, healthcare, education, and psychological support services that addressed the comprehensive needs of people recovering from systematic abuse. The $12 million reward money that had originally motivated our search for biological family became the foundation for an educational scholarship program that provided college funding for trafficking survivors, pursuing degrees in law enforcement, social work, medicine, and other professions focused on protecting children. Over 50 survivors had graduated from four-year universities through foundation support, creating a network of professionals with personal experience who could advocate effectively for policy changes and improved services. Our work with federal law enforcement agencies led to the establishment of specialized units trained specifically in trafficking investigations that prioritized survivor welfare rather than just criminal prosecutions. These units included survivor advocates as permanent staff members, recognizing that effective investigations required understanding the psychological dynamics that influence victim behavior during questioning and court proceedings. The life lesson that emerged from our 30-year journey through captivity discovery and recovery centered on the resilience of human connections that survive even systematic attempts to destroy them. The bond between Marcus and me had endured decades of separation abuse and manipulation because it was founded on something deeper than shared experience or environmental factors. Our biological relationship provided an anchor that remained constant despite everything that was done to erase our original identities and replace them with manufactured roles designed to serve our captors' purposes. The most profound transformation in our understanding came through recognizing that healing from trafficking trauma required more than just individual therapy or family reunification. Sustainable recovery depended on building communities of survivors who could support each other while working together to prevent other children from experiencing similar abuse. Our foundation's support groups brought together people from different trafficking situations who discovered that their shared experiences created bonds stronger than their differences in background or specific trauma history. The broader impact of our case extended beyond criminal prosecutions to influence legislative changes that strengthened protections for missing children and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies investigating trafficking cases. Federal funding for missing children investigations increased substantially after congressional hearings featured our testimony about the systemic failures that had allowed the trafficking network to operate for decades without detection. Today, as I reflect on the journey that brought us from childhood kidnapping to adult advocacy, I am struck by the power of individual choices to create changes that extend far beyond personal circumstances. Agnes's decision to approach me at my grandfather's funeral with evidence about my true identity set in motion a series of events that ultimately saved dozens of other families from experiencing the grief that my biological parents had endured for 30 years. The foundation continues to grow as Marcus and I develop new programs designed to address emerging forms of trafficking and exploitation that evolve constantly as criminal organizations adapt to law enforcement pressure. Our latest initiative focuses on online exploitation and digital trafficking that uses internet platforms to recruit and control victims in ways that did not exist when we were children. The question that drives our ongoing work is simple but profound. How many children are suffering in silence right now because no one has given them permission to hope for rescue? Every day that passes without intervention represents additional trauma for victims who may believe that their situation is permanent and unchangeable. Our story demonstrates that freedom is possible even after decades of captivity, but only when people like Agnes choose to act on their suspicions and provide information that can trigger investigations. What would you do if you suspected that a child in your community was being exploited or abused? Would you have the courage to speak up, even if you weren't certain about the situation? I encourage you to learn about the warning signs of trafficking and exploitation so that you can recognize when intervention might be necessary to save a child's life. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts about how ordinary people can help protect children from trafficking. If this story moved you, please like this video to help it reach others who might benefit from hearing about the possibility of hope, even in the darkest circumstances. Subscribe to stay updated on our ongoing work with the Sullivan Foundation, and share this story with friends who care about protecting children from exploitation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our journey, and for caring enough about these issues to consider how you might make a difference in preventing future trafficking cases. May you find the strength to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and may your actions create ripples of change that protect children from ever experiencing what Marcus and I endured for 30 years.